we will get going. Okay, I'm going to get going now because we don't want to run over. So I am so delighted that we're having this conversation today. So hello and welcome to the Rural Youth Project Ideas Cafe. And today we're going to be talking about LGBTQ visibility and acceptance in rural areas. I'm Ellie Strome and I work for the Rural Youth Project, and we're so delighted that this important conversation is going to happen here with you all present today. And we know that we're competing with the sunshine now, so thank you for coming along. And we are just going to kick straight in there. So very sadly, we know that huge numbers of LGBTQ plus people continue to experience marginalisation and abuse in some communities. And yeah, huge numbers of people are expressing that they feel fear around being accepted by their immediate communities and society at large. On balance, however, we know that more young people than ever are identifying as LGBTQ+, which suggests that perhaps people feel actually more freedom to explore their sexuality in their and express themselves. We know that many thousands of LGBTQ plus people are living and working in rural areas, but perhaps it doesn't always, or want to live in rural areas, but perhaps fear being accepted in communities that don't always reflect their beliefs, values, and culture. So here we arrive at the conversation of visibility. We know that visibility increases acceptance as what we don't see and connect with on a basic human level, heart to heart, we often find harder to understand and easier to fear. So sorry about the background noise here. So with less LGBTQ visibility in rural areas, perhaps simply through lacking critical mass and therefore the diversity that we find in cities, rural places can perhaps seem like a less inviting, more hostile place to be, perhaps, as we are going to discuss a bit today, completely unnecessarily. So we are going to explore today where we're at, where we could be, and how we're going to get there. And we really do have an amazing panel with us today. So I hope that you will, will welcome them in, because it's just such an honour that you've all decided to come along today and be here with us. And so I'm going to hand over straight away to Matt Naylor, our fantastic chair for this evening. Matt is director of Naylor Flowers and founder of AgRespect, an amazing network of people. An amazing network promoting, supporting diversity in the countryside. So thank you so much, Matt, for holding this conversation this evening, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Welcome, everybody. If your first question is, why have we got a pale, male, stale person chairing this, and even worse, an English one, then I can only apologise, because we haven't got much to teach people about acceptance south of the border today. But that makes it a really good time to have this conversation. So welcome to everyone who's joined in, whether you're here because you're proudly LGBTQI and want to join in, whether you're questioning your own situation, whether you're here as an ally, or whether you're here as a homophobe who's going to try and cut a hand grenade in, and going to be overwhelmed by the positivity, then it doesn't matter. You're all very welcome. We've got an excellent panel of speakers. We're going to let them all introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they do and give us some background, hopefully stimulate a bit of debate, and then we've got room for questions and discussion at the end. We'll leave plenty of time for that. As those of you who are familiar with this will know the normal ground rules: microphones off when you're not speaking, and if you think of a question midway through and want to post it in the chat, you're very welcome. So we're going to start with Kieran, followed by Julianne, then Paula, then Lydia, and then we'll come back and have a discussion. So Kieran, would you like to take it away? Thank you.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. It's very nice to connect with you. Despite it being on Zoom, I will never accept this form of technology as a replacement for human communication, but here we are. It's so nice to see LGBT people. It's been I'm just sort of like living in a little bubble on the island. So I'm Kieran. I am on Orkney, on Hoy. So I'm on an island of about 400 people. And I am, I suppose, a playwright to trade. And I think it's really important to start telling stories about kind of the relationship between my home on the islands and my queer identity. So that's what I'm doing, as well as other community organising events. Something I've kind of discovered from having these conversations is that maybe my experience on the island is very positive. And I think it's really important to tell those good stories, and that actually maybe my little island is a progressive utopia, if anything. So yes, nice to see everyone.
Thank you, Kieran. Julianne, would you like to introduce yourself to us, please?
Yeah, thanks. Nice to meet you all. I'm Julianne and I use she and her pronouns. I'm the youth worker for LGBT Scotland based in Dumfries and Galloway. We have our office in Dumfries. So LGBT Scotland is a national charity that works right across Scotland with young people 13 to 25 around their gender identity and or sexual orientation. We do different youth groups locally, and we do events nationally, and we also do one-to-one support for young people. We do a lot of capacity building within professionals across the region, and interactive education sessions in secondary schools. I've been at LGBT Youth for 12 years now, not looking to head anywhere anytime soon. Love it. It's every day so different, and I'm definitely seeing an improvement in rural areas for the lives of LGBT young people. We do an annual study every year, which maybe talk a bit more about later, about the experiences of our young people. And I have went to the young people this week and asked them what their current experiences are. So I've got some of that I can feed in later as well, if that's of interest. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I've never been to this kind of cafe before, so it's every day's a school day.
Thank you, Julianne. And now, Paula, you're on my other screen, so I've got to work my way through the technology. And Paula, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Paula Manners and I also use she, her pronouns, and I must confess to everyone today to living in a highly urban area. I live in Glasgow and I'm from Edinburgh, which may be taboo in this situation, but I'm here as the Digital Youth Work Manager at LGBT Scotland, and one of our priorities for this year is to use our digital community to be reaching out more to LGBT young people in rural areas. So I'm just really delighted to be part of this conversation and thinking about, you know, how we can do that really well and what those needs are. So I'll be delighted to jump in, I suppose, thinking a bit more about what improvements can we make and how can we use digital spaces to create that connection for young people in remote rural areas. That's me.
Thank you. And Lydia is the last on our panel.
Thanks, Matthew. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm Lydia. I'm based here in the Peak District National Park. My experience is I grew up on a hill farm here, really struggled coming out, came out when I was 19, didn't go very well. I decided to get as far away from the farm as possible. So I've turned my back on agriculture. Didn't think I'd be accepted at all in the farming community based on my experience sort of growing up. And then due to a bit of a tragedy, actually, I moved back to the Peak District with my partner a couple of years ago and got involved with AgRespect. And I realised for the first time, having a conversation with AgRespect where I had to sort of write about my own story, and I did a little presentation for them too, that prompted me to speak to my parents just to make sure they were cool with me talking about my coming out experience and how difficult it was. And I realised that was the first time 7 years later I'd actually spoken to my parents about my sexuality since I came out. And so where I'd been on a journey, like meeting loads of people around the world, they hadn't. And then I realised, like, coming back to live in that rural community is like, I've moved on a lot, they hadn't, but through talking to them now, bringing them up to speed, I now feel completely comfortable here in the Peak District. I sit on the board for the Peak District National Park, so I'm the youngest member by about 25, 30 years. And I also work for Arla Foods, so for the dairy company, and I grew up on a dairy farm. So it's sort of been full circle for me. And what I'm really interested in is getting those conversations around the kitchen table changed, really, because a lot of organisations are much further ahead. But it's people's perceptions in the household. So an example is the Peak District National Park, very sort of inclusive and want to be more inclusive. But my mum at a wreath making workshop a couple of years ago at Christmas was sitting next to an employee of the Peak Park, and she was just chatting to her. She mentioned that I had a girlfriend. And then afterwards, my mum came up to me and said, "I'm so sorry, Lydia, I told her that you had a girlfriend and I'm really worried about how this is going to affect your position on the Peak Park." And I said to my mum, "Look, I think the reason why I'm on the Peak Park is because I have a girlfriend." But my mum didn't kind of realise that. And so, you know, we have to bring people with us. So that's all from me for now.
Thank you. So I think something that came out for me there, particularly for Julianne and Paula, who are working with young people, but a question to all four of you is, how are things changing? Julianne, you said that you've been working with young people for 12 years and you're interacting with people from the age of 13. Lydia said that she came out when she was 19. I'm in my 40s, late 40s, and came out when I was 29. Which still was a big journey for me. What do you think, Julianne, and then we'll come to everyone else, is the situation now? Is it getting easier?
I'm not sure if it's getting easier or young people are getting a wee bit more confident. We've had an increase of younger young people coming out recently. So our younger group, we have a group 13 to 17, and we've had a kind of influx of a lot of new young people who have recently came out. But I think because we're doing a lot of work with schools around our LGBT charter march scheme, so schools are being more inclusive, talking about LGBT identities, raising the visibility, is creating a safe place for young people to come out in schools, which is giving them a safe place to be out, and in turn that's hopefully making it easier to come out in the wider community.
Thank you. What's your perspective, Paula?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges for the rural young people that we work with is just the not being able to have huge connections to other LGBT young people. And I think that's in some ways a challenge that probably isn't going to go anywhere in terms of physical space, because the more remote you are, the harder it is to meet different kinds of people because you're just further away. And that's why I'm so keen to use digital spaces and digital communities to help bring young people together so that they can see that there's that visibility and there's those connections that they can make to feel confident in who they are. And I think it's fair to say as well that over the last, 10 years, there's been hugely increased LGBT visibility in sort of public-facing media like TV, print media, social media. Like, young people are more connected online. But certainly what we are hearing from young people is that they're not always facing a lot. They don't always get a good reception when they approach services like healthcare services. Like, some schools are doing really fantastic work working through our LGBT charter scheme, which, like Julianne says, is a program that we run that supports organisations and schools to look at their LGBT inclusion. There's training, there's policy review, they have to run visibility projects, which is great. And there's probably other schools who could do with doing quite a bit more work to make sure that their schools are safe environments for LGBT young people who still experience really high levels of homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying in schools, which has a massive impact. So good things and bad things.
Yeah, thanks. Lydia, when you were teenage, how much were online communities and those sort of networks useful to you? I'm a bit older, so in those days, gay men were putting notes in telephone boxes, although that's never been my cup of tea. But the internet was something that came much later in my life. Was that something that was helpful to you?
The internet was only just kind of taking hold. I had MSN and things, so it was actually a bit better for me, but it still did feel quite isolating because the people I was talking to, they weren't from rural communities, so it's from sort of, I guess, dating sites or that kind of thing. But I'd say now with I've been so lucky with AgRespect. It's changed my life in the last 2 years from how I feel on a daily basis. So I don't think about my sexuality anymore. I don't worry about it at work. I don't worry about having to tell someone or not having to tell someone. It's just like me, my life. But it's through shared experiences and shared stories of people from your similar background, even though we're all different, that has completely transformed my life. So I think where there's digital settings, I think the challenge is getting the people with a shared experience and a shared kind of sexuality or experience there is so powerful in making you feel more comfortable and then stronger to be yourself.
It is something that that AgRespect covered in a conference that Lydia spoke about, is the tribalism and how people we are tribal creatures. We like to be with people of our own type. That's why Shoffles and Land Rovers sell so well in the farming industry. And I suppose that was one of the reasons that AgRespect started, because people in rural areas who are LGBTQI are almost a tribe within a tribe, it felt to me. But Kieran, your experience of growing up on an island with 400 people is almost like a pure experiment in what it's like to come out in a small community. And how was that? How do you think that differed from had you been born in a city in the mainland?
Yeah, I think it probably was a social experiment. That's maybe an interesting way of looking at it. And it's just so fascinating to hear some of the other perspectives. In my case, internet wasn't really available; it was rubbish, and so I think I was absolutely in the physical space. And I think because we're so small, there is that sense everyone knows you already. So I was like 16, 17, so probably shouldn't have been in the pubs then. But you'd be out there, and I remember things like people would be questioning you, but absolutely from a point of curiosity, like not malice. And I think because you've got that sort of heritage on the island of you have to be neighborly. It's such a small place and they're fragile communities. So in some ways it's a hybrid. So, you can have something of an LGBT community, but it always kind of has to go into the mainstream of the island as well, because it is just so small. And it's interesting, I think there is something in the heritage of this specific community that was quite open. And I don't know if it would go back to the war when people were just this particular island was a huge base for that. And people just started welcoming in refugees, soldiers, people they'd never seen before. And for survival or whatever, you had to accept people. And people were sort of in the habit of getting to know people. And so my granny's generation and things, she's not without, lots of people aren't without prejudice, but there's that openness to learn with people. There's not an initial standoffishness. I think there's something quite interesting in the history of that. But it really isn't to sort of paint a magical picture of Orkney as being completely fine. I've got plenty of issues, but I think something that's really good is the community as a whole. I think the people are actually really good allies. A lot of my critique would come from sort of top-down government and seeing, what efforts are actually being made structurally to help people who are experiencing homophobia or isolation. And I think it's really important, as much as it is really good to have those digital spaces, I think it can't replace the physical space either, where people can make those connections. And it's not perfect at all here. People are still leaving. So LGBT people probably won't really stay. They probably will go to the city. There's still that perception that there's more there. So it is still a mixture, but it has actually, hearing other people's stories and throughout time realizing actually that was a really positive experience that I have had, and that is probably uniquely privileged in some ways.
And that's quite interesting, the concept that in a smaller community there isn't the opportunity for people to be homophobic. You're too close knit for anybody to have that. For anyone to exhibit that, and that's quite interesting to reflect on.
I think. Sorry. I was going to say, I think as well. There's plenty of room for squabbling, but I think you almost get an opportunity where you're given the space, and I think that's a really important thing. Generally, is getting people into a space where they can express themselves. There's a lot of pressure on one person, so that's not necessarily perfect. But you're given an opportunity where the individual will be judged on their character. I think in a smaller place, I think there's something in that to be said as well, as opposed to your identity label, which they probably don't know what that is, not to generalize, but that, you know, it's you as a character first.
Through your writing and artistic pursuits, you're able to sort of tell more stories and bring a wider perspective to other people. Can you tell us a bit about what you've done in the past and how that's worked? What sort of reaction you've had?
Now I might look a bit like a traitor. My writing has chiefly been put on in Glasgow and different areas, so that maybe I'm a bit frightened, not from the queer identity at all, but to be putting things like dialect and specific stories about Orkney to those audiences. No, it has been, while I've been here in the pandemic and things, I found things like creative writing, writing blogs and things about, you know, queer island experiences and things like that, and putting them out there. I think it comes from that place of really wanting to connect with people and kind of lay a foundation of something of a community. But no, with writing, I am really fascinated by how you can blend the two things of, you know, your queer identity and your home, in this case, on the islands. And I've sort of been going back into history, into the islands, you know, rich storytelling heritage, and taking, you know, folk tales and looking at it from a different perspective. I suppose from that queer lens of inquiry, and sort of altering things for a modern audience, I find really, really interesting. But I think it's really important to tell stories even more so for, you know, the outside audience who are looking at the islands from, or any rural area, you know, maybe from an urban perspective, and changing that perspective that there might be a kind of one-dimensional perspective of what these communities might be like. I also think they're really distinct as well. Each sort of geography can be really different. I think that's something really interesting to be explored.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the exciting things about perhaps society being more welcoming to people's individual identities, is we can only hope that will encourage people to stay in communities that they're born in, and to immerse themselves and protect the cultures and traditions. With regard to the storytelling and messaging, and for Julianne and Paula, you're working with young people. What are the good and bad influences that children get when they're on their, you know, young adults, when they're sort of working out who they are? What do you think is the best and the worst of things that they encounter these days? We'll start with Paula, if that's okay.
Well, I think that LGBT young people now have, like I said, a lot more like increased visibility of LGBT role models, like more broadly. So they are seeing, I suppose, that potential and possibility. I think whereas historically LGBT people, we've often struggled with, you know, not being able to see those people who are embodying that sexual orientation or gender identity, and we don't feel like it's going to be possible for us to have. Whereas I think that's changed a lot now. Regardless of where you are in the world, you will be able to see those TV shows or see those people, you know, like celebrities who are talking about it or whatever else. And like I said, again, I think one of the biggest issues facing our young people continues to be that kind of prejudice-based bullying in schools. That has a massive impact on them, a whole like range of levels. So just in terms of like your sense of yourself and your confidence growing up, if you're being attacked for who you are by your peers, that has a massive impact, and equally has a massive impact on your adolescent experience in general, which is all about where you learn to make friends, you learn to have relationships, and if that's disrupted, that has a big impact going forward. So that's what I would say, but I would love to know what Julianne says, because she works with a lot more rural LGBT young people than I do.
Yeah, Julianne, what would you say to that?
I would echo that as well. I think the internet has been a great tool for widening young people's experiences and giving that visibility of role models, but also finding themselves communities. We've got lots of young people that are finding their own groups, you know, so like virtual groups. Currently, obviously, we have our Discord server, but also a lot of them are in other groups. So we're all doing internet safety and all that jazz, but there's more options for them to make wider communities while being rural. I would say one of the negative experiences that comes for our young people is kind of that word of mouth from experiences, maybe of negative experiences of services or places or professionals or individuals. Sometimes that kind of spreads through the young people, and they can base their experiences on other young people's. So that maybe has sometimes an impact. But I think there's more positives, definitely, than there. Oh, thank you. Somebody's reading my blog. Sorry, I easily get distracted. So I think that's definitely been something, and we've been doing a lot more when we're saying about creative writing and stuff. A lot of our young people have been very into creative writing this year, particularly as an outlet during the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Lydia, you were talking about your role within the Peak District and how you suspected that you might have been positively discriminated or selected through positive discrimination, which I think is wonderful in terms of representation. How's that experience been with the people that you've met through it? Arriving with that identity, you know, sort of hanging over your shoulders, if you like, that responsibility.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, really, because for me, my main barrier was actually applying, because I looked on the board and I thought, like, no one there looks like me. They must have 50 years of experience that I don't have. And it was actually speaking to a farmer who's now in his 50s, but he was actually 27 when he joined the board. And he said, like, I was the same age as you when I joined. Like, just go for it, you'll be fine. So even though, like, I think it helped that I was young and LGBT, actually there was no real barrier there in terms of experience or anything like that. So it was actually less of a tick box than I thought it was in the beginning. And also a lot of it has just been in my own head. So I've been able to contribute a lot of things that and people have been very, very responsive to it and really warm. I've been really welcomed and accepted. And I think half the people still, you know, wouldn't really be thinking about sexuality or anything like that. And it's just nice to have a voice at the table and in the room, but not feeling like I have to have the voice. And there's other people, you know, speaking up about the same issues and bringing them to the table as allies. So it's just really amazing to be part of that discussion. And I just say for everyone here is, like, if you're interested in decision making and how things, how decisions are made, go for it. Like, have a look, apply for it. You'll probably find out that you have got a lot of relevant experience, and people are crying out for young people to be making decisions.
I think that's a really good point, is that people, it can be, I think that the shame that society probably still attaches to people who are different, stops them from speaking up. And the good thing is that there are now more spaces. I think there is a real appetite to get diversity on boards. And those of you who didn't see Savills, the estate agents, get absolutely crucified after one of their employees put up a racist comment this week on Twitter. Savills condemned it, and then about 100 people put up a photo of their board, which was 25 middle-aged white men looking seriously at the camera in a tie, and it looked quite politically, I don't know, it looked really, really inappropriate in this day and age. So we've sort of explored where we are and what it's like, the current situation. What do you think needs to change? In many ways, we have equality in law for well, certainly for gay and lesbian people. Paula, if we start with you, what do you think still needs to be done to make things better, to encourage more inclusion in rural areas?
I love what Lydia said earlier about those kind of kitchen table conversations and the impacts that happen at a really micro level when people speak to their families. And I suspect for a lot of rural LGBT young people, even though there is a lot of visibility, there's not necessarily that visibility of LGBT rural young people. So I wonder if there is still that perception of, in order to be happy and confident as an LGBT person, I'll need to leave a rural area, I'll need to move into the city, if that's not something they would otherwise have wanted to do. So I think there's, I don't know, I wonder if there's maybe an issue of representation there that's specifically the kind of stuff that AgRespect's looking to do. I think that work of connecting up young people together so that they're able to meet in person or digitally with other young people who've gone through similar experiences. Our young people value peer support so much and get so much out of being with other young people who are in similar experiences. That's such a powerful thing. Like, I think we probably all relate to that, regardless of our sexual orientations or gender identities, that we know that feeling like an outsider is horrible, and when you connect with the people who have that similar experience, you feel normal, you feel okay about yourself again. And I think I would probably, again, in terms of access to services, I think I would want to outline as well just the experiences of our transgender young people within LGBT youth, their kind of healthcare needs. I can imagine, and I'm sure Julianne would be able to confirm this, that for those rural young people, they're going to need to travel quite far to get access to gender identity clinic services, and the waiting times are just extremely long, definitely into the years now, especially with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's something that I know the Scottish Government is looking at, but that is like a real priority because of the mental health impacts that we then see on young people. Yeah, that's what I would say.
And Julianne, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would definitely echo that access to service, but the visibility that services are inclusive and welcoming as well would be real key, because a lot of our young people feedback that although we say, oh, you'll be safe there, unless they see something that's visibly showing them that they'll be included, or they don't see themselves in any of the promo, whether that be age, orientation, family structure, identity, anything, they don't always feel that they can take themselves through the door of said service. I think as well, more awareness of hate crime legislation, so that people know that there is consequence to their actions. And certainly we do that a lot with young people, but quite often our young people feedback to us that, you know, as youth workers, we are saying to them about consequences of their actions, but they are seeing things online which are basically hate statements, but still there doesn't seem to be the same consequence digitally or for adults sometimes. That's something that our young people quite often feedback, that they can feel like they get penalised by us as youth workers saying, no, this is the consequence if you say these kind of things, but actually they don't feel that that's replicated wider in the world. And I think just more visibility and more groups. I'd asked some of our young people this week, you know, what is their key issues and what would they like in their dream world? And they're feeding back, you know, like rurality is an issue in the sense that transport is an issue, the timing of transports, the cost, the reliability. Obviously, given with the pandemic as well, that's been increased. A lot of young people are feeding back again just that knowledge of where to go. So if there's a poster in one place in the school and they happen to miss it, or there's a group once a month that they can actually get to. And certainly that's where we've branched out more with some of our digital, but more face-to-face stuff as well, so that we don't move totally digital. Blended.
Kieran, what do you think? Is there anything that you think needs to change to really bring true equality and to allow people to be themselves? And the second part of that question, I suppose, on the island, are there people there who could be LGBTQ but that you assume aren't feeling comfortable to come out? And what could be done to help them?
Yeah, no, I agree with what the others were saying. I think, you know, I think it's kind of in some ways quite simple. There's a clear inequality in rural areas with access to services that you wouldn't have in the city. And it's not perfect in the city either. There needs to be way more work there for LGBT people, pit them against each other. But also social opportunity as well. So allowing people to be in a safe, social, creative space as well, where they can connect with people. So absolutely visibility and that opportunity for connection, where you don't have to travel that far, I think is really important. We still have LGBT people leaving the islands and other rural spaces, so it's clear in that there needs to be a lot more. Just to go on to that second point, I think not to make too many assumptions, but I would say yes, that does happen. I think, you know, I think when I was younger, I probably used to think, but it's fine, you know, it's fine. But although you might sort of have a community that are pretty good with you, it's really a personal experience. And I guess if you're still looking out at that wider world and the things, you don't see yourself and there is no representation and visibility, then you do have that sense of repression. I think it probably, as well as I'm saying it's been a pretty positive experience, you probably do forget the time where it was actually quite frightening, even if it was a short period of time. And I guess that fear is still in people, and the longer it's kind of left, the more it sort of, I guess, it gets embedded. And I think as well, there's that lack generally of social opportunity. I think people then look towards alcohol, things like that. And I think this sort of maybe invisible queer spaces that emerge in rural areas might be quite unhealthy ones. So I would quite like to see, maybe as a solution, because I think some communities are really quite distinct and different. I would like to see almost government funding that are quite issue and geographic specific. So looking really closely at what a particular place needs, and if it's funding that needs to happen so that you get more spaces. I would like to see more efforts kind of from an infrastructure perspective. And I think top down from the government. That's what I think.
Yeah, what do you think, Lydia, in your community, do you think there are people who are LGBTQI or questioning, who are older, who didn't get the opportunity to come out when they were younger? I'd say that because when I was as young and thinking, is it time to come out? If somebody else came out, that used to make me feel probably that it wasn't my turn, that I had to then stay in for a bit longer. It made me more self-conscious. But what have you found, Lydia? Has your openness sort of led to people approaching you and talking about their truth?
Yeah, they have. When I've sort of stood up and spoken about it, I have had people who wouldn't normally talk about it. And it's always been quite surprising. So I used to do quite a lot of after dinner speaking, but I always had a joke about a boyfriend. And then it always felt really awkward at the dinner when people asked me, have you still got a boyfriend or whatever? And I'd come out and I moved on. But I always felt like my audiences wouldn't accept me if I said I had a girlfriend in the joke. But then when I changed the joke to be about a girlfriend, suddenly, my daughter's girlfriend. And then, my auntie, whatever. And then you realize there are loads of people out there who have relatives and they daren't talk about it. They're scared to talk about it. And it only takes one or two people, connections with one or two people to think, actually, it is okay. Someone else doesn't care. I don't have to care. And I think, around sort of conversations and assumptions. So I used to find it really hard. It took me a long, I knew I was gay when I was 10 and I didn't come out until I was 19. And in those 9 years, I was quite homophobic because I was so scared of people guessing that I was gay because I used to play cricket and that kind of thing. And there was always like, do you wear a box? Are you a lesbian? That kind of thing. And I didn't want to be that. And every time someone said, have you got a boyfriend? It made me think I could never come out to them because they'll be homophobic. And it's actually not true. It's just people assuming, because it's still like a massive assumption that a girl has to have a boyfriend. And I think the more we can change the language around talking about partners, that would have had a massive impact for me. So sitting in my farmhouse, if like a corn rep came into the farm and said, do you have a partner? I think, I could say I have a girlfriend and they'll probably be receptive to that. And I think where we can build language into our allies, so everybody who isn't massively homophobic, which is hopefully most people, I think we'd create a better positive space for younger people to come out and it'd be just normal. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. And Paula, do you think gender identity in agriculture, where when anybody says farmer, people think of a man, because it's always farmer and farmer's wife. How harmful are those stereotypes, do you think, to young people as they work out their own gender identity? And then, and following on from that, what's your experience of working with young trans people and how gender relates to their situations?
I think gender stereotypes are harmful towards all LGBT young people because a lot of homophobic bullying is based on young people being gender non-conforming and not fitting into what we think a stereotypical man is or what a stereotypical woman is. but they obviously do have a significant impact on our transgender young people as well when they're trying to work out what their identity is, and doing that when there's like huge amounts of social pressure. So our transgender young people often talk about feeling quite pressured that they have to be like a very masculine man, or they have to be a very feminine woman, in a way that we don't necessarily have those expectations of other young people. What was the second half of your question? Did you ask me what my experience of working with transgender young people?
Yeah, are you working with transgender young people, and how does their experience compare to people? And this is relating to Pip's question. Chat box. How does that? But I'm guessing I won't prejudge your answer, but I'm guessing they have a harder experience than somebody coming out as gay or lesbian now. And how could that be improved?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that LGBT equality has come really far, and that trans equality is still kind of falling up behind, not quite getting there in the same way. That said, there has been hugely significant sort of trans visibility, even in the last couple of years, with people like Sam Smith or Demi Lovato coming out as non-binary, like shows like Transparent that like showcase transition and like showing young people that there are like trans role models about who they can look up to and admire. And I suppose again, I would highlight that those kind of like medical issues, like not being able to access gender identity services, like are quite specific for our trans young people. We do LGBT supports a large number of trans young people as well as LGBT young people. And of course, trans young people can also be lesbian, gay and bisexual. Those aren't totally separate categories.
Julianne, how would you, and in your experience, what do you think the extra challenges are for trans people, and what should change to make that better?
Yeah, very similar. I was going to say that predominantly the highest percentage of young people we work with rurally in Dumfries and Galloway is around trans identities or non-binary identities currently. And I would say as well, gender stereotypes is massive. We were even taking part last week in the National Sexual Health Standards consultation, and talking about family planning and things. And that's certainly something that comes up with our trans young people, feeling that they can't admit if they want to have children in the future, or their gender's not believed if they want to use their gender that they were, their sex that they were born with, even though it doesn't align with their gender identity. So stereotypes is a really big thing. And again, like Lydia was saying about language and using language, is definitely something that really affects them. But I would say, like Paula said as well, inclusion is further on for LGBT. Was that me? No. Did I stop that recording? No. That's fine. I thought I pressed something on my keyboard. It's a wee bit further on, and maybe even trans is a wee bit more further on inclusion than non-binary currently. We're seeing a lot of our young people have been mentioning that even there's some protections for trans young people, but not necessarily for non-binary young people. So that's something I would say. And sorry, what was the second?
Well, Ellie's just asked a question, is the importance of pronouns, not judging, not guessing people's or assuming people's pronouns. How important is this within organisations?
I would say massive. Because again, it kind of sets the tone. If we ask somebody their pronoun, then they know that they can respond openly, whereas if we make an assumption, then they have to go against that, and then they have that whole kind of internal dialogue. Well, if I say that, what will happen? Whereas actually, if you've asked an open question, there's the more freedom to answer. And actually just saying, introducing myself, I'm Julianne, I use she and her pronoun. What would you like me to use for you? It sets the tone and actually shows that you're going to be inclusive and understanding, and most of all respectful. Even if people don't always understand, it shows that you're willing to be respectful.
Yeah, it's a thing that I found interesting because AgRespect in the early days got a lot of media interest about inclusion as a whole, but it took me probably too long to realise that I'm not a worthy spokesperson for the lived experience of somebody who's non-white or someone who's lesbian or trans, and that's always something that I realised that to be a good ally isn't necessarily to be their spokesperson, and I think that I'm still working out the boundaries around that. I think, right, we've got a quarter of an hour left. I'm going to take my life into my hands and attempt to take some questions, comments and observations from everyone else who's with us. So my screen's frozen, so this could go one of two ways, but who would like to pose the first question or, you know, make a comment about their own experiences? I think there's a way of raising a hand, but just switch your microphone on and blurt it out if you have anything you'd like to say. And I'll scroll through, but I've got a page full of frozen screens.
Matt, I've got a few questions as well.
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, that I followed up on the chat. So one of them was like, how can organizations and individuals that aren't necessarily involved in youth services or LGBTQ issues, how could just the average business and the average individual make like act to support LGBTQ young people and people? And I guess Paula, you looked like you were ready to say something, so go.
I was. Thanks. I was also looking at what Hannah's put in the chat there about the funding that the Equality Network have from the Scottish Government to develop a project where spaces like cafes and shops can have a visibility mark to indicate that they're safe spaces for LGBTQI young people to meet, which sounds really similar to like breastfeeding friendly initiatives that I've seen previously. And I think, like Julianne said, that is something that our young people look for really significantly, those like outward signs that this might be a safe space. So like lots of small businesses this year did things for Pride and like put things in their window, and that just really communicates like we are going to be a safe space for you to come into. So stuff like that I think is massive. And it doesn't have to be this like massive thing. That could just be as simple as like putting a Pride flag up in the window and then being friendly and nice to any LGBT people who come in. You know? I'm pretty sure I've lost that.
I would maybe just add as well, like as simple as putting our pronouns on our email signatures or on our staff IDs. Again, sets the tone.
Absolutely. Kieran and Lydia, do you have any other ideas that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think echoing what Julianne and Paula said. But I think welcoming over welcoming people basically, because I don't think people don't understand our experience unless they've heard us say it. And sometimes we assume that, you know, they might see articles on the news or whatever, but a lot of people don't realize the importance of it. And if they did, they would go out of their way to help. So again, like I spoke at Oxford Farming Conference about it for the first time last year, and I had about 4 or 5 emails from farmers saying, thank you so much. I had no idea that this was still a problem. And if I knew, I would have probably done something a bit different or made an effort. And I think we're still at that stage. We still need to be talking about it, and we still need to be showing that we're welcoming. So the reason why I joined Arla is it's a cooperative. The first thing I looked at was their like equality thing. And it said, we welcome everyone, no matter who you are, where you come from. That's what equality and inclusion means to us. It's everybody. And straight away, I feel like, right, great, I can be myself. And it hasn't come up. And I don't feel like I have to tell anyone. I don't feel like I don't have to tell anyone. And I didn't realize until yesterday, one of my colleagues who I've known for 5 weeks, we chat every day, she was like, oh, I didn't even realize you had a girlfriend. And I was like, yeah, that's amazing that I haven't had to think about it. And that's what, to me, inclusion feels like. And if we can get to that stage where we're welcoming at number one, we can all be ourselves.
And it's a thing that you notice in people, and I've noticed it through friends, is when people are allowed to be themselves at work and in their family, they flourish. There's just so much more available if all of their personality is and passion is available in their working life and their creative life and their home life. I'm not sure whether we've got, I've just noticed Emily Brown is on. I'm not sure whether you're still there or whether you could put your microphone on, but I was very interested I would be really interested to know what it's like as heading up the student union at Harper Adams. now, and how attitudes are there? Because that would have been the most terrifying place on earth when I was 20.
Yeah, there's a lot of work. Sorry, I've got a puppy in the background who's currently got a milk carton that she's chewing. Hopefully you can hear me. So it's actually something that for the forthcoming year, I'm really looking at, like specifically with the EDI like stuff and the policies. I mean, specifically with Harper, there's a massive problem still. I mean, you see that on social media, the Farmers Weekly, for example, or even some of the AgRespect stuff, the comments that go on of naming people and saying, oh, you're gay or something like that. And that is pretty widespread throughout the uni. So it is one of those that needs to be tackled, but it's very sensitive at the same time. So it is really difficult as well, trying to work with the uni to kind of come up with something that we can put out there and hopefully help students. But it's interesting you mentioned about the pronouns, because that's something in more of our emails that we're including just as a small step. And we're actually aiming to do some educational videos to kind of help students as well.
Yeah, thank you, and good luck with that, because it's extraordinary, and I think that is quite. It really saddens me when you see homophobic, transphobic, sexist, racist opinions amongst young people in an agricultural college, and presumably, you know, that is where this stuff sits. But it's a shame that people even feel safe to express it. Have we got anyone else? Are there anyone else with us who's got a comment to add or an observation of what they think could make things better?
Matt, we've got some great questions as well in the chat. I could pass them over. I've got Zara Keith, who says she works with young people across the Highlands, and a lot to report that schools are not supportive of LGBTQ young people, and some people have experienced homophobia and transphobia from teachers, and she'd like to know how the panelists think that we can challenge schools' attitude towards the LGBTQ community in an effective way. Maybe that's over to Julianne, because you're working directly with schools.
Yeah. So I was going to say, certainly we would say across Scotland, schools can take part in the LGBT Charter Mark scheme for schools, which is kind of guiding them through the process. But on a basic level, going to the schools and asking them to look at their inclusion policies, their quality and diversity policies, their uniform policies, whistleblowing policies, getting young people empowered to feedback if they're actually being targeted or having negative things said to them by staff. So kind of raising that, but offering support, but then going in that kind of use the policies that are there. If you feel you're getting nowhere with the school, go to your local education board and just keep kind of going up. But certainly I'll post my email address at the end of this. So if anybody has any direct questions about specifics, how it works and how we work with schools, feel free to get in touch with me after.
That's a good point. I can't imagine anything more scary than encountering homophobia from somebody who's supposed to be there to teach or protect you, or a responsibility figure. Have anyone else or anyone else who's with us had any experiences of that from, and it's, you know, it's tough if it's your family, but from anyone else who was supposed to be looking after you?
We have another question actually to follow on from that, Matt. I just don't want to miss any in the chat, just from Dean, and I've just missed it. It was another one to fire at Julianne and Paula about whether you believe that there's a divide in LGBTQ access and resource in schools, with a like rural urban divide, or areas that are depicted as deprived or affluent. Do you feel they're being addressed differently in those areas?
Can I just check just to help me understand the question? Does that mean schools where there's a mixture of rural and urban young people, or just that is there differential within urban and rural schools?
I think probably in urban and rural schools, and looking at areas that are seen as deprived or affluent. I
mean, I definitely think that more urban schools have gone through our LGBT Charter Mark, which I think is possibly partly just because that's where our central bases are. So that's where we've had like our relationships and our partnerships have grown. But I think, you know, Zara's kind of reflecting there that what she's hearing from young people across Highland is that they are facing homophobic and biphobic and transphobic attitudes from teachers, and that kind of speaks for itself in terms of young people's experiences. I sort of don't want to make sweeping generalisations about rural schools versus urban schools without really being able to base that on anything, but I know that at least some rural schools in Dumfries and Galloway have done some great work. We've got Wick Academy, which is one of our Highland secondary schools that's starting to work with the LGBT Charter, and often I think what we've found is that you'll just get, like Lydia was saying about, you know, it just takes one person in the school who's really championing a cause and really pushing for greater inclusion, that makes all the difference. Because there is, yeah, it just makes a massive difference to be able to do that and like bringing that visibility into the school. But I don't want to slander rural schools because it'll be that here.
And I would maybe add, sorry, I was just going to add that rural schools can each be quite different in how they approach inclusion and how they approach their training and their staff development. So we kind of take on every school basis. So that's where I would be saying going to your individual school. But certainly the local authority board in Dumfries and Galloway have been pulling together a hub on, they use Glow for teaching resources and support for teachers. We are linking in with a lot of professionals across the schools across the region, and again it's definitely changing, but yeah, I wouldn't want to make any statements of where it might be better or where it might not be.
And I think that's why, just jumping again, that's a really important point from Julianne about like not like, and I think, you know, Kieran's kind of touched on this as well, the variation in rural experiences across Scotland is just vastly different. So the experience of a young person and their school in Orkney compared to Stornoway, compared to somewhere in rural Galloway, is just hugely different. The cultures are different, the communities are different, and the schools are different. And we are absolutely definitely open to working to all schools. We're looking to improve the LGBT inclusion because there's some absolutely amazing work that's happening in Scottish schools that would have been, I think it's fair to say, Julianne, like in the 12 years you've been in the organisation, the progress that schools have made in being just really visible and accepting of LGBT identities, like lots of schools have gay straight alliances now, like kind of little equalities clubs, like that is new from the last decade. To have groups of LGBT young people in schools and teachers facilitating that safe space is amazing. That is really game changing for LGBT young people.
I think there is a lot. I mean, we're drawing to 7 o'clock and the sort of the end. Is there anything else, any questions that I've missed, Ellie, that we would like to pose before I round things up?
The only one was speaking to Kieran the other day. We were discussing like how the difference in like LGBT culture, the huge variety of different expressions of that in different areas, and how actually to kind of think about what might be rurally appropriate and how we kind of activate gatherings of a different sort that maybe feel more in tune with the place. So I just wondered if Kieran, you wanted to speak to that a little bit, and maybe Lydia as well. It would be really good to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, just quickly, you summed that up really well, Ellie, I thought. Yeah, so we've been looking at things in terms of sort of the landscape and what it has to offer in rural areas. So we are sort of, as part of working with a development trust at the minute, looking at getting things like cycling communities and how you can promote LGBT inclusion through outdoor activity. And so when people say like, what's the best thing about living across these islands, people often say it's the landscape, it's the beauty and all those things. So kind of embedding those assets that you have with kind of queer expression and trying to create community with those two things, as opposed to just sort of maybe looking at the cities and saying what works well there, what are the dominant communities, and should we replicate that? I don't think we should. I think there's a really fun, exciting exploration to be had between a queer experience in a rural specific setting.
Yeah, do you have anything to add to that, Lydia?
No, just that is such a good idea, and yes, I support that.
Come cycling.
Yeah, I'm gonna start some cycling clubs now. Definitely into it.
And I think that is the most positive note to finish on. And my experience has been the same, that it is about owning our identity. And actually, sometimes if you don't have people in your community who are your role model, then then it's your job to be the role model for others. And from my experience, as you know, we said at the start, as someone who's older, you do grow into that, and actually that's where the consolation comes in. So to go out and create those communities. And so please do keep in touch with the Rural Youth Project. And if you want to interact with AgRespect and join our network of people, find us on social media. And because there are so many events that we can go out, and just living our lives well in our communities is enough to bring new possibilities to other people. So a huge thank you to all of our speakers and to everyone who's joined us this evening. And I hope that everybody goes away from it feeling positive about the subject. A big thank you to the Rural Youth Project for organising. So I'll hand you back to Ellie. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Matt, for hosting, and thanks to our wonderful speakers. What a fascinating conversation. I feel like we could have probably sprawled on for hours, but everyone's just got such rich kind of perspectives to add to this, so thank you. And I know a lot of you put your email addresses in the chat already, so if people want to reach out, that's brilliant, and thank you for making that available. This kind of came about because we really want to hold ourselves accountable as an organisation and individuals to make sure that we are creating spaces to have these conversations. So I think I've learned some things from this, and I hope we can kind of all go away and just think about one sort of simple action that we can make ourselves just in our day-to-day lives to make it more welcoming spaces in rural communities. So let's continue the conversation. It's far from over. Please head over to our Rural Youth Project Smart Village website, where we'll be posting our next event. So we're going to do an Ideas Cafe every single month, and so we'll be announcing the next one. We're going to be looking at housing and different issues around rural housing. So please come along to that, and we'll be letting you know through our social media when that's coming. But I know we've run over.